You're under attack right now, not physically, spiritually, and the proof is undeniable. Every time you build momentum, something destroys it. Every time you're about to break through, a crisis appears. That exhaustion you can't shake, the betrayals that keep repeating, the delays that always hit right before success. These aren't coincidences, they're patterns. 9 specific patterns that confirm you've been flagged, targeted, and systematically suppressed because of what you carry inside you. But here's the intelligence they tried to hide. Every attack contains an activation code. The 9 signs of spiritual warfare aren't just symptoms, they're keys to power you weren't supposed to discover. This is your classified briefing. The invisible war is real, you're in it, and everything you've survived has been preparing you for what happens when you finally understand the battlefield. Your activation begins now. Chosen one, like this video, subscribe, and comment, I am ready for a powerful surprise. Chapter 1. Early Warning System. How your life was flagged for interference. There was a moment before you were even old enough to understand yourself when something in the unseen realm took notice. Not because of what you had done, but because of what you carried. A signature, an energetic blueprint that registered on frequencies most humans never activate. The disruptions didn't start when you failed. They started when you showed signs of succeeding in ways that would matter beyond your personal life. Think back carefully to the timeline of your obstacles. When did the first major interruption occur? It wasn't during a low point. It was right when momentum was gathering, right when a door was opening, right when you were about to step into something that would have accelerated your path exponentially. That's the evidence. Opposition doesn't waste resources on people who pose no threat to the current order of things. The system that monitors human potential operates with cold precision. It identifies rising signatures, individuals whose consciousness is beginning to vibrate at frequencies that could influence collective reality. You were one of those signatures. Long before you had any concept of your own purpose or power, the pattern of your life was already being logged, analyzed, and marked for intervention. The early obstacles you faced weren't designed to destroy you outright. They were tests, small deployments of resistance sent to measure your response patterns, your resilience thresholds, your ability to adapt under pressure. Would you collapse at the first sign of difficulty, or would you push through? Would you internalize defeat, or would you keep searching for another way forward? Every reaction you had was data. Every time you fell and got back up, every time you pivoted when a path closed, every time you refused to accept the narrative that you were powerless, it was all being recorded. What makes this particularly insidious is that the interference was calibrated to seem natural, an opportunity that fell through at the last moment, a relationship that inexplicably turned toxic right when you needed support, a health crisis that appeared out of nowhere just as you were about to launch something important, financial collapse right before a major transition. These weren't random life events. They were strategic deployments designed to look like ordinary misfortune, because if you recognized them as attacks, you might have also recognized what they were protecting you from discovering: your own significance. The pattern reveals intention. When the same type of obstacle appears repeatedly at the same type of moment, right at the threshold of expansion, you're looking at deliberate interference, not bad luck. Here's what confirms it. Beyond doubt, the obstacles were always proportional to the opportunity they blocked. Small progress triggered small resistance. Major breakthroughs triggered catastrophic interruptions. The scale of opposition matched the scale of threat your advancement posed. If you were truly insignificant, if your path truly didn't matter, there would be no reason to interfere. Resources wouldn't be allocated. Attention wouldn't be paid. The fact that resistance showed up consistently at critical junctures is proof that something in the unseen architecture of reality recognized your trajectory as dangerous to systems that depend on human limitation. You were flagged because you mattered. The attacks began because your potential, if allowed to fully activate, would create ripples that extend far beyond your individual life. You weren't supposed to know this yet. You were supposed to believe you were unlucky, broken, cursed by circumstances beyond your control. That belief was the containment field. But now, you know the truth. Your life entered an interference watch list not because of who you were, but because of who you were becoming. Chapter 2. Constant observation. Why you felt seen without being known. You've felt it for years, haven't you? That strange sensation of being watched when no one is there. Not paranoia, something else. A presence that doesn't announce itself but makes its weight known through the prickling awareness at the back of your consciousness. You've been in empty rooms and felt crowded. You've been alone in your thoughts and sensed an audience. This wasn't imagination. Your life has been under continuous observation by forces tracking your development, monitoring your emotional signatures, and measuring your proximity to dangerous levels of awareness. The solitude you experienced, those long stretches where it seemed no one understood you and you couldn't find your place among others. That wasn't abandonment. It was quarantine. Isolation reduced the external noise that would interfere with the signal clarity they needed to monitor what was happening inside you. Think about the moments when your intuition suddenly sharpened to an almost supernatural degree. Times when you knew something before it happened, when you felt a truth about a person or situation that had no logical basis but turned out to be absolutely accurate. Those spikes in intuitive awareness weren't random gifts. They were moments when the observation field thinned, when the pressure of being watched decreased just enough for your natural perceptive abilities to break through. The stronger your intuition became, the more uncomfortable those around you got. Because intuition is threat detection for the soul, and when it activates, it starts identifying what's false in your environment, including the people, systems, and beliefs that were placed there to keep you contained. Every time you had déjà vu, every time you experienced that eerie sensation of having lived a moment before, you were brushing up against timeline monitoring. Your consciousness was accessing information about probable futures, catching glimpses of the path laid out ahead, and the observation system had to recalibrate to keep you from seeing too much too soon. But they weren't just watching passively. They were tracking your emotional reactions as data points for predictive modeling. How did you respond to betrayal? Did it break you or sharpen you? How did you handle disappointment? Did it lead to despair or determination? Every emotional response you had was logged because emotions are the language of the soul, and your soul's patterns revealed whether you were adapting in ways that would eventually break through containment or whether you could be managed indefinitely. The observation wasn't invasive in the way human surveillance is. It was frequency-based. Your emotional states emit specific vibrations, and those vibrations can be read by consciousness that operates on higher dimensional bandwidths. When you felt rage, it registered. When you felt hope, it registered. When you felt the dawning of understanding that something about your reality wasn't what it seemed, that registered loudest of all. Here's the part that will make everything make sense. The confusion you felt, that persistent sense of being split between multiple versions of yourself, multiple possible paths, multiple conflicting truths about who you are. That happened because you were being observed from multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Different aspects of your consciousness were being monitored by different levels of the observation system, and the overlap created interference in your own self-perception. You couldn't get a clear picture of yourself because the picture was being refracted through observation fields that were analyzing you from angles your conscious mind couldn't process. This is why you've struggled with identity, why you've felt like you're playing a role in your own life rather than living authentically, why no label, no category, no identity framework ever fit quite right. You were trying to define yourself while being defined by observers who needed you to remain uncertain about your own nature. The discomfort you felt in your own skin wasn't dysfunction. It was your consciousness trying to reconcile what you knew internally with what the observation field was projecting back to you externally. Chapter 3. Memory Suppression. Why key moments feel blurred or heavy. There are memories in your past that should be clear but aren't. Significant events that shaped your entire trajectory. Yet when you try to recall the details, you hit a fog. Not the natural fading of time. Something else. A heaviness that settles over certain periods of your life, making them difficult to access, uncomfortable to explore, almost painful to sit with for too long. This is not trauma creating natural dissociation. This is strategic memory suppression designed to prevent you from recognizing the encoded information within your own experiences. Certain moments in your past contain activation codes, specific combinations of experience, realization, and emotional imprint that, if fully remembered and integrated, would trigger immediate awakening. Those moments had to be obscured. The memories weren't erased, they were buried under layers of emotional weight that would discourage you from digging too deeply into them. Think about the events in your life that feel disproportionately heavy when you touch them in memory. A conversation that changed everything, but you can't quite remember what was said. A moment of clarity that felt profound at the time, but has since become vague and dreamlike. A period of crisis that you survived, but the details remain slippery, like trying to hold water in your hands. That heaviness, that fog, that slipperiness, it's not accidental, it's camouflage. The emotional weight acts as a deterrent, making it unpleasant to revisit those memories, ensuring you'll naturally avoid the very experiences that contain the keys to your understanding. You were conditioned to associate those memories with pain, confusion, or destabilization, so you wouldn't look at them closely enough to see what they actually were. Download moments, times when information from higher dimensions of your own consciousness was attempting to break through into your waking awareness. The trauma you've carried has served a function beyond the obvious harm it caused. It created fragmentation in your timeline, breaking your life story into disconnected pieces that are difficult to see as a coherent whole. When you can't see the pattern of your entire life laid out clearly, you can't recognize the thread of purpose running through it. You interpret your experiences as random suffering, personal failure, or proof of your own inadequacy, rather than seeing them as a carefully orchestrated initiation process. Every traumatic event was also a test and a teaching. The pain was real, but embedded within it was information about your own strength, your capacity to endure, your ability to transform suffering into wisdom. That's the encoded lesson. But if you could access it easily, you would have activated too soon, before the preparation was complete. Here's the mechanism. Memory is not stored only in your brain. It's encoded in your energetic field, in the cellular structure of your body, in the vibrational signature of your consciousness across multiple dimensions. When memory suppression is deployed, it targets all these levels simultaneously. The mental fog is just the surface effect. Beneath it, your body carries the memory as tension, as chronic pain, as unexplained illness that seems to have no physical cause. Your emotions carry it as triggers that seem disproportionate to present circumstances. Your energy field carries it as blockages that prevent the free flow of life force through specific channels. All of this serves to keep the encoded information locked away. And the people in your life, particularly influential figures, authority figures, people who shaped your self-image during formative years, many of them functioned as memory suppressors, whether they knew it or not. They told you who you were in ways that contradicted your internal knowing. They reinforced versions of your story that minimized your significance. They distorted your self-perception just enough to keep you from recognizing what you were actually living through. Chapter 4. Bloodline Targeting. Why pressure existed before you. The attacks didn't start with you. Long before you were born, before you took your first breath, before you opened your eyes to this world, the interference was already in motion within your bloodline. Look at your family tree, not just with your eyes, but with your awareness. Notice the patterns that repeat across generations, the fractures that seem to appear in the same places, the same types of traumas, the same struggles with addiction, or mental illness, or financial collapse, or relational breakdown, showing up again and again, like a curse that no one can name, but everyone feels. These aren't genetic predispositions in the way science understands them. These are inherited markers of bloodline targeting, evidence that something in your ancestral line posed enough of a threat that interference protocols were deployed generations before you arrived to inherit them. Your ancestors carried something, a gift, a knowing, a connection to power that exists outside the approved channels of religious and social control. It might have been shamanic ability. It might have been prophetic sight. It might have been healing gifts that worked through touch and intention rather than medicine and science. It might have been nothing more than an unbreakable spirit, a refusal to bow to unjust authority, a dangerous commitment to truth that couldn't be trained out of them. Whatever it was identified as a threat, and the response was to fracture the family line, create division between parent and child, introduce addiction and mental instability to discredit and disable, ensure poverty to keep focus on survival rather than spiritual development, break the bonds of trust and communication so that knowledge couldn't be passed down intact from one generation to the next. Your family's struggles weren't just bad luck or poor choices. They were the result of sustained interference designed to prevent transmission of latent traits that would eventually concentrate in someone like you. The silence around your ancestors is evidence of erasure. If you've noticed that you know almost nothing about your great-grandparents or the generations before them, that's not normal family forgetfulness. That's the result of active suppression. Stories that should have been told weren't. Names that should have been remembered were forgotten. Roles that should have been honored were hidden or distorted. The keepers of family history often discovered it was safer to let certain information die with them than to pass it on and watch their children suffer for carrying it. What you don't know about where you came from is often more significant than what you do know. The gaps in your family story mark the places where something dangerous was hidden. And here's what matters. You activated dormant attention by carrying unresolved lineage traits. You're not just living your own life. You're completing an arc that began generations before you. The gifts your ancestors couldn't fully express, the missions they couldn't complete, the resistance they couldn't overcome. It all accumulated in the bloodline, concentrating and intensifying until it reached you. This is why you've always felt different from your family, even while sharing their patterns. You're carrying the compressed potential of multiple generations. Everything they couldn't do, you can. Everything they couldn't say, you must. The very traits that got them targeted. The sensitivity, the refusal to accept comfortable lies, the inability to ignore injustice, the connection to invisible realities that others dismiss as superstition. Those traits are amplified in you, and the opposition knows it. They've been tracking your bloodline, waiting to see if the interference worked, if the fracturing was complete, if the gifts were successfully suppressed. Your birth was a critical moment of assessment. Would you be another casualty, another broken link in a chain of defeated sensitives? Or would you be the one who finally had enough strength, enough awareness, enough pure, stubborn refusal to quit that you could break through where your ancestors could not? The pressure existed before you because they knew you were coming. The prophecy of your arrival has been echoing through your family line for generations, and everything done to your ancestors was ultimately preparation. Harsh, brutal, traumatic preparation for the resistance you would face. Chapter 5. Strategic Isolation. How separation built internal strength. Every relationship that dissolved at the moment it seemed most promising wasn't evidence of your unworthiness. Every friendship that inexplicably turned cold when you needed connection, most desperately, wasn't proof that you're unlovable. Every romantic partner who left just as you were beginning to feel safe wasn't confirmation that you're destined to be alone. These separations followed a pattern that reveals intention, not accident. You were isolated strategically because proximity to certain people at certain stages of your development would have triggered premature activation. There were things you needed to build inside yourself first, capacities that could only develop in solitude, strengths that required the absence of external validation to fully form. The loneliness you endured wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Every person who left your life did so because their continued presence would have interfered with what you were becoming. Think about the relationships that ended abruptly, without clear reason or closure. You were connecting deeply, feeling seen and understood in ways you'd never experienced before. And then suddenly, distance. They pulled away, or you did, driven by discomfort you couldn't name. That discomfort was frequency incompatibility. As your consciousness began shifting to higher bandwidths, the people vibrating at your former frequency couldn't maintain resonance with you. It wasn't personal rejection, it was physics. Two things vibrating at significantly different frequencies cannot remain in stable connection. They either synchronize or separate. Most people cannot or will not shift their frequency to match yours, especially when you're moving into ranges that challenge their entire worldview. So separation became inevitable, not because anyone failed, but because your paths were diverging at the level of consciousness itself. You were ascending steps they weren't ready to climb, and every attempt to bring them with you, to make them understand, to keep the connection alive through the transition, only delayed what had to happen. The social discomfort you felt your entire life, that sense of being an outsider, even in groups where you should belong, that exhaustion that comes from trying to fit into social structures that feel fundamentally wrong, that knowledge that you're performing a version of yourself rather than expressing your truth, all of it was enforcing self-reliance over external validation. You couldn't find your identity through others, because you weren't meant to. Your sense of self had to be built from the inside out, independent of social approval, immune to collective opinion, unshakable in its core regardless of what others thought or said. This is rare. Most people derive their entire self-concept from external feedback. They are who others tell them they are. They believe what their social group believes. They want what their culture tells them to want. They are consensus creatures, defined by the collective. But you couldn't be that. Every attempt you made to merge with a group identity failed because your function requires you to stand apart, to maintain an independent consciousness that can perceive what the collective cannot. The loneliness compressed your awareness rather than weakening it. When you have no one to talk to about what you're experiencing, you're forced to develop your own interpretive frameworks. When you can't rely on others for emotional regulation, you build internal stability. When you can't turn to relationships for distraction from existential questions, you face those questions directly and find answers inside yourself instead of accepting borrowed answers from others. This is how the isolation served you. It made you strong in places where most people remain dependent and vulnerable. It gave you a relationship with your own consciousness that doesn't require external permission or validation. It taught you to trust your own perception even when everyone around you insists you're wrong. And here's the proof that it was by design. Every time you tried to blend into an ordinary path, every time you attempted to want what others wanted and live how others lived, every attempt to build a conventional life with conventional goals and conventional relationships, it failed. Not because you weren't trying hard enough, but because success in that direction would have been failure of your actual purpose. Chapter 6. Authority Conflict. Why systems never fit you. From early on, you clashed with authority in ways that confused even you. It wasn't deliberate rebellion. You weren't trying to be difficult, but rules that everyone else seemed to accept felt fundamentally wrong to you. Not just arbitrary or unfair, but actually incorrect at a level you couldn't articulate. Instructions that others followed without question triggered something in you that said, no, there's another way. This doesn't make sense. This isn't true. Teachers, bosses, parents, law enforcement, religious leaders, medical professionals, government officials. Every type of institutional authority you encountered seemed to be operating from frameworks that your consciousness simply couldn't accept. You tried to comply. You wanted to fit in, to avoid conflict, to be approved of and rewarded like others who followed the system. But your instincts kept overriding your attempts at obedience. This wasn't personality dysfunction. It was frequency incompatibility between your consciousness and the controlling structures of consensus reality. The systems weren't designed for your function. They were designed to create obedient participants in existing power structures, not sovereign beings who question the foundations of those structures. Educational institutions reward memorization and compliance, not original thought or genuine understanding. Corporate hierarchies reward those who suppress their authentic selves to perform profitable roles, not those who insist on integrity and truth. Religious structures reward faithful repetition of approved doctrines, not direct mystical experience or personal revelation. Political systems reward those who choose a side and defend it regardless of truth, not those who think critically and see beyond false dichotomies. Every institution you encountered was fundamentally a containment system, and your consciousness kept recognizing them as such. This is why you couldn't succeed within them, no matter how hard you tried. Success would have required you to turn off your perceptive abilities, to ignore what you knew, to betray your own awareness in exchange for approval and reward. Authority figures specifically targeted your perception because clarity is the greatest threat to control systems. If you can see clearly what's actually happening, if you can recognize manipulation when it's deployed, if you can distinguish truth from sophisticated lies, then you cannot be controlled through the normal channels. So they challenged your perception directly. They told you that what you saw wasn't real, that what you felt wasn't valid, that your interpretations were wrong and theirs were right by virtue of their position and credentials. They gaslit you systematically, not necessarily with conscious malice, but as an automatic function of their role within control structures. When you expressed insight that threatened the official narrative, punishment followed. Not always dramatic punishment, sometimes just subtle disapproval, withdrawal of favor, exclusion from opportunities, being labeled as problematic or difficult. The message was always the same: see less clearly, question less deeply, accept what you're told, or face consequences. Here's what confirms it was targeting and not personality conflict. Success inside rigid systems triggered resistance rather than reward. When you did manage to excel within institutional frameworks, when you proved you could perform at high levels, that success didn't lead where it should have. Promotions that should have been automatic went to less qualified people. Recognition that should have been given was withheld. Opportunities that should have opened stayed closed. Your excellence became threatening rather than valuable because it came from a place of authentic capability rather than trained compliance. You couldn't be counted on to stay in line just because you were rewarded. Your success came from inner drive and genuine skill, which meant you had power that wasn't granted by the system and therefore couldn't be fully controlled by it. The system could tolerate mediocre obedience, but it couldn't tolerate excellent independence. So it pushed back against you hardest when you were succeeding, ensuring you understood at a visceral level that these structures were never going to accept you fully, no matter what you achieved within them. Chapter 7: Signal Events: Why Clarity Triggered Chaos. There have been moments in your life when everything suddenly made sense, not the gradual understanding that comes from learning, but instantaneous clarity that arrived like a lightning strike, illuminating your entire reality in a single flash. In those moments, you saw through illusions you'd been living inside, recognized patterns you'd been blind to, understood truths about yourself and your reality that changed everything. These weren't random epiphanies, they were breakthrough events, moments when your consciousness pierced through the veils that normally keep human awareness confined to approved frequencies. And if you pay attention to what happened next, you'll see the proof that these moments of clarity created detectable shifts in the environment around you. The chaos that followed wasn't coincidence, it was reaction to signal emission. Your consciousness, in the moment of breakthrough, broadcast a specific frequency signature into the field, and that signal was detected, triggering immediate countermeasures. Watch the pattern closely. You have a profound realization about your purpose, about who you really are beneath the identity you've been performing, about the truth of what's happening in your life. And within hours or days, something falls apart. A crisis erupts. A relationship explodes. Technology malfunctions. Financial disaster strikes. Health symptoms appear. The chaos arrives with such perfect timing that you can't help but notice it, yet you've been trained to interpret it as evidence that your clarity was wrong, that your insight led you astray, that you should return to the safe numbness of not knowing. This is the mechanism. Your moments of insight create vulnerability in the containment field around your consciousness. When you see clearly, you stop feeding energy into the illusions that keep you controllable. The system detects this drop in your compliance frequency and deploys distractions designed to pull your focus away from the truth you just accessed, back into survival mode where clarity is impossible. Distractions appeared immediately after internal breakthroughs, and they weren't subtle. They were proportional to the significance of what you had realized. Small insights triggered small distractions, a phone call, an argument, a minor inconvenience. Major breakthroughs triggered catastrophic distractions, relationships ending, jobs lost, accidents, illnesses, full-scale crises that demanded every ounce of your attention and energy. The function was to create such overwhelming external chaos that you couldn't maintain focus on internal clarity. You were forced to deal with immediate threats to your survival and stability, which meant the insight you'd gained got buried under layers of stress response. By the time the crisis was handled, the clarity had faded. You remembered having the realization, but you couldn't access it with the same intensity or certainty. This is strategic interference. The realization itself couldn't be erased from your memory, but your ability to act on it could be delayed indefinitely through the deployment of well-timed chaos. Emotional highs attracted external instability. Every time you felt genuine joy, peace, excitement, hope, states where your frequency elevated above the baseline of survival stress, something arrived to bring you back down. Not through your own psychology, but through external events you had no control over. Someone close to you would suddenly need crisis support. An unexpected bill would arrive. Your car would break down. A conflict would emerge. The pattern trained you unconsciously to fear positive emotional states because you learned to associate them with impending disaster. This is one of the most sophisticated control mechanisms. If you can be conditioned to self-regulate your own frequency, to keep yourself from feeling too good or too hopeful or too powerful, then external interference doesn't have to work as hard. You become your own suppressor. Every time you started to rise, you'd unconsciously sabotage yourself or find reasons to return to familiar suffering because some part of you believed it was safer there. And that belief was installed through the consistent pattern of progress summoning counter-pressure. You learned to stop progressing because every forward movement brought painful resistance until staying stuck seemed like the only way to avoid more harm. Chapter 8: Failed Suppression: How Pressure Produced Adaptation. Every method used to weaken you produced the opposite effect. This is the critical error in the targeting of your consciousness, the assumption that pressure creates collapse when applied to your type of awareness. It doesn't. It creates adaptation. The opposition deployed strategy after strategy designed to break your will, fragment your sense of self, convince you of your own powerlessness, and keep you trapped in cycles of suffering that would prevent you from ever accessing your full capacity. But your consciousness didn't respond the way their models predicted. Instead of collapsing under the weight of sustained attack, you developed structural resilience that wouldn't have formed without the pressure. Every attempt to weaken you forced you to become stronger in ways you never would have chosen, but now cannot lose. The emotional strain was intended to destabilize you permanently, to create such deep wounds and ongoing trauma responses that your entire life would be consumed by trying to heal yourself, leaving no energy for anything else. But that's not what happened. The emotional pain refined your perception instead of destroying it. You learned to read emotional frequencies with precision because you had to. Your survival depended on being able to sense what was happening beneath surface appearances, to detect danger before it became obvious, to recognize deception and manipulation even when they came disguised as care and concern. The very trauma that should have left you broken actually sharpened your awareness into a blade. You can see through people now in ways that make them uncomfortable. You recognize patterns in behavior that others remain blind to. You feel the truth of situations beyond what's being said or shown. This wasn't a gift you were born with. It was a capacity forged through the necessity of navigating environments where your emotional and psychological survival required extreme perceptual accuracy. They didn't predict that you would survive. Their models showed breaking points, and you should have reached yours multiple times over. The accumulated weight of betrayal, loss, trauma, disappointment, and defeat should have been enough to collapse your will to continue. Most people in your position, facing the specific combination of obstacles you've faced, do give up. They don't die, but they stop truly living. They settle into resigned existence, going through motions without hope, without fight, without belief that anything can ever really change. That was the expected outcome for you. But you exceeded predictive models. You kept going when there was no logical reason to. You found strength in places that shouldn't have contained any. You pulled yourself up from depths that should have been final. You refused to stay broken even when breaking seemed like the merciful option. This confounded the suppression protocols because they're designed based on the assumption that human will has a calculable breaking point. Yours, apparently, doesn't. The pain itself became a teacher, though not in any comfortable or poetic way. It taught you about the structure of consciousness, about how much can be endured and survived, about the difference between harm and transformation. You discovered that suffering doesn't destroy awareness. It forces awareness to expand or be crushed by its own confined state. Most of your pain came from the gap between what you could perceive and what you could accept, between what you knew to be true and what you wanted to believe, between your soul's requirements and your life's circumstances. That gap created enormous internal pressure, and pressure does one of two things: it crushes or it crystallizes. Your awareness crystallized. It became harder, clearer, more precise. The parts of your consciousness that couldn't withstand the pressure burned away, leaving only what was essential, unbreakable, true. This refinement exceeded the limits that opposition expected. You were supposed to be weakened to the point of uselessness. Instead, you've been refined beyond expected capability, hardened by the exact forces meant to soften you into compliance. Chapter 9. Silent Interventions. Wins you were never meant to see while you were focused on the attacks, on the obstacles and the struggles and the inexplicable difficulties that seemed to pursue you relentlessly. Something else was happening that you weren't conscious of. Threats were being resolved without your knowledge. Critical moments were being stabilized by interventions you never saw. There were points in your timeline where the trajectory was leading toward outcomes that would have been genuinely catastrophic, not the manageable disasters you survived, but the kind that end possibilities permanently. And something shifted those trajectories. Not your own efforts, because you weren't aware the threats existed. Not random luck, because the pattern of resolution shows precision and intention. There were other forces at work in your favor, operating in silence, because if you knew what was being prevented, you would have also known things you weren't ready to understand yet. Think about the moments when you were in despair, convinced everything was ending, certain that you couldn't survive what was happening, and then, unexpectedly, inexplicably, something changed. A door opened that shouldn't have. A person appeared with exactly what you needed at exactly the right moment. A solution manifested that you hadn't thought possible. Resources arrived from nowhere. The threat that seemed insurmountable simply dissolved, often leaving you confused about why you'd been so afraid in the first place. You attributed this to luck, to coincidence, to your own resilience finally paying off. But the timing was too precise. The interventions were too specifically calibrated to what you needed in that exact moment. This was protection deployed from levels of reality you couldn't perceive, by allies you didn't know you had, for reasons connected to your function that you weren't yet conscious of. The pattern shows repeated interception. Not every threat was allowed to reach you in full force. Many were deflected, diluted, or redirected entirely before they could impact your life in ways that would have derailed your development. You were allowed to face exactly the level of difficulty you could metabolize and transform into strength, while threats beyond that threshold were quietly neutralized. This is why you survived when the odds were overwhelmingly against you. This is why you're still here, still conscious, still functional, when by all reasonable assessment you should have been destroyed long ago by the accumulated weight of what you've faced. There were multiple conflicts resolved in your favor that you never knew were happening. Battles fought on your behalf, in dimensions of reality you have no conscious access to. Strategic interventions by forces that have been tracking your development and ensuring you make it through the preparation phase intact enough to fulfill what you're being prepared for. Awareness was withheld deliberately. If you had known you were being protected, you would have relaxed into false security and stopped developing the capacities you needed to build. If you had known there were allies intervening on your behalf, you would have become dependent on that intervention instead of developing your own power. The perception of being completely alone, completely unsupported, facing overwhelming odds with nothing but your own will to rely on, that perception was necessary. It forced you to discover resources within yourself that only emerge when external support is absent. You had to believe you were doing it all on your own in order to actually do it on your own. The help you received was calibrated to keep you alive and functional without making you aware it existed. This is tactical protection, operational cover maintained until you were strong enough that knowing the truth wouldn't weaken you. You're finding this out now because the preparation phase is ending. Chapter X: Narrative Distortion. Why common stories never matched. Every spiritual framework you encountered told you stories about how awakening works, what the path looks like, what signs to expect, what stages to move through, and none of them matched your actual experience. The common narratives described light-filled journeys of progressive enlightenment, supported communities of fellow seekers, teachers appearing when the student is ready, clear signs and synchronicities guiding the way. They spoke of ascending through predictable stages, of darkness giving way to light, of suffering being temporary and purposeful in obvious ways. But your path looked nothing like that. Your journey was darker, lonelier, more chaotic and confusing than the maps described. The teachers who appeared often betrayed you. The communities rejected you. The signs were contradictory. The darkness didn't give way to light. It deepened and became more complex. This discrepancy wasn't because you were doing it wrong. It was because the public frameworks were altered to mislead recognition. The spiritual narratives that most people have access to were designed to describe journeys that don't threaten existing power structures. They describe paths of personal enlightenment that leave the fundamental architecture of control reality unchanged. People can have their awakenings, their moments of peace and clarity, their sense of connection to something greater, as long as those experiences don't translate into actual power that could challenge the systems that govern collective human consciousness. Your role was intentionally excluded from familiar archetypes, When you searched for yourself in the spiritual stories, in the myths and legends and sacred texts, you couldn't find your reflection. The heroes of those stories had different challenges, different gifts, different destinies than what you were living. This absence was strategic. If you can't find your archetype in the approved narratives, you can't understand your function. You remain confused about your purpose, unsure of your significance, unable to step fully into the role you were born to play. Look at what the common spiritual narratives emphasize: unity consciousness, unconditional love, non-judgment, acceptance of what is, surrender to divine will, forgiveness of all transgressions, seeing the light in everyone, releasing anger and boundaries as ego attachments. These are teachings that produce spiritually passive people who won't fight back, people who interpret their own oppression as a lesson in surrender, people who forgive their abusers and call it enlightenment, people who witness injustice and do nothing because they believe everything is perfect as it is. These teachings serve control systems perfectly. They create a population of spiritually aware people who pose no threat because their awareness leads them toward passivity rather than power. But your path required different teachings. You needed to learn discernment, not unconditional acceptance. You needed to develop healthy rage at injustice, not transcend all anger as unspiritual. You needed to build boundaries and recognize enemies, not dissolve all distinctions in unity consciousness. The expectations placed on you by conventional spiritual frameworks felt wrong because they weren't meant for you. The delay in your recognition, the years you spent confused about your purpose and unsure of your path, actually protected you. If you had understood too early what you were being prepared for, if you had recognized your significance before you had the strength to carry it, you would have been neutralized more aggressively. The forces that target consciousness like yours are most effective against those who know they're significant but haven't yet developed the capacity to protect themselves. You would have been a visible target, marked and monitored even more intensively, subjected to interference protocols that would have been overwhelming before you built the resilience to withstand them. The confusion kept you hidden. Your uncertainty about your own importance made you less detectable to the monitoring systems that track rising consciousness signatures. You developed in relative obscurity, growing stronger while adversaries remained misaligned regarding your actual threat level. Here's what the distorted narratives prevented you from understanding. You're not here for personal enlightenment. That's not the mission. Personal transformation is a side effect of preparation, not the goal itself. The common spiritual stories describe individual journeys toward individual liberation because that's the scope of what's permitted. But your function operates at collective scales. What you're being prepared to do will create ripples that affect far more than your personal reality. The frameworks that should have explained this to you were compromised before you were born, altered specifically to ensure people like you couldn't recognize themselves or understand their function until the exact right timing. You're learning your true story now because the delay period is ending. The false narratives served their purpose by keeping you safe while you weren't ready. But continuing to operate from those frameworks now would only limit what you're capable of becoming. Chapter 11. The 9 Attack Signs: How Pressure Became Access. The exhaustion you've carried isn't laziness or depression or chronic fatigue syndrome, though it might have been diagnosed as any of those things. It's the result of energy interference, your consciousness operating at frequencies that create friction with the baseline reality most humans exist within comfortably. Every day, you function in consensus reality. You're burning extra fuel just to maintain coherence between your awareness level and the lower frequency environment you're navigating. This creates the sensation of being drained by ordinary activities that others handle easily. Social interactions exhaust you because you're processing multiple layers of information simultaneously, not just words and surface meanings, but emotional frequencies, hidden agendas, energetic signatures, and truth beneath performance. Your system is running constant high-level processing that others aren't, which means you need more recovery time, more solitude, more silence to restore your energy. The exhaustion marked energy interference, not personal weakness. Betrayal sharpened your discernment protocols in ways that trust never could have. Every person who betrayed you, especially those you loved deeply, those you trusted completely, those who seemed aligned with your path, taught you something essential about reading consciousness accurately. You learned the difference between what people project and what they actually are. You developed the ability to sense incongruence between words and energy, between stated intentions and hidden motivations, between the mask someone wears and the reality beneath it. This perceptual capacity is critical for your function because you'll need to navigate environments where deception is sophisticated and skilled. The betrayals you experienced were devastating, but they transformed your discernment from naive trust into refined detection. You can't be fooled easily now. You see through manipulation. You recognize predatory consciousness, disguised as friendship or love. This wasn't a gift you wanted, but it's one you'll need. The fatigue that arrives precisely when you're making progress isn't evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's confirmation you're on the right one. Notice the pattern. You start moving forward with clarity and momentum, taking action toward your actual purpose, feeling alignment between your internal knowing and your external choices, and suddenly, you're hit with waves of exhaustion that make even simple tasks feel impossible. This is resistance manifesting as physical depletion. Your energy is being drained by interference fields that activate when your frequency rises above certain thresholds. The fatigue follows growth points, not decline. If you were declining, moving away from your purpose into comfortable delusion and safe mediocrity, you'd feel energized. The system rewards movement away from truth with ease and comfort, but movement toward truth, toward power, toward the activation of your actual function that triggers countermeasures designed to slow you down before you reach velocity that can't be stopped. Delay has occurred at every threshold, never at endpoints. Look at the timing of when obstacles appeared in your life. They didn't show up when you were already defeated, already broken, already stopped. They showed up right before breakthrough moments, right before you would have crossed into new territory, accessed new levels of capability, stepped through doors that would have accelerated your trajectory exponentially. The delay tactics were deployed at thresholds specifically to keep you from crossing them. An opportunity would open, you'd be positioned to step through, and then sudden crisis, unexpected obstacle, mysterious problem that demanded all your attention and prevented you from taking the next step. By the time you resolved the crisis and returned your focus to the opportunity, the timing had passed. The door had closed. You'd missed the window. This happened repeatedly, creating a pattern of almost but not quite that left you feeling cursed, like success was always just out of reach. But the pattern reveals that you were close enough to matter, significant enough to delay, dangerous enough that your progress had to be managed. Here's the hidden mechanism that transforms everything. Each attack sign doubled as an unlocking code. The exhaustion that depleted your energy also forced you to develop access to reserves most people never discover. The betrayals that shattered your trust also taught you discernment that can't be deceived. The fatigue that slowed your progress also built endurance that won't quit. The delays that frustrated your timing also refined your patience and strategic thinking. Every single symptom of spiritual attack was simultaneously a training protocol, building capacities you couldn't develop any other way. The attacks weren't just obstacles to overcome, they were transformation mechanisms, pressure applied with precision to create specific adaptations. You weren't just surviving the attacks, you were being forged by them into something that wouldn't exist without them. The 9 signs aren't warnings to avoid. They're confirmation codes that you're exactly where you need to be, undergoing exactly the preparation your function requires. Chapter 12. Quiet Activation. Why nothing announces itself. You've been waiting for a moment, a clear sign that everything has changed, that the preparation is complete, that you're now operating in your true power and purpose. You've imagined there would be some kind of announcement, some dramatic shift you'd feel in your body or consciousness, some external confirmation that would make it obvious you've crossed the threshold from becoming to being. But that moment isn't coming, not the way you've imagined it. Because activation doesn't happen ceremonially. There's no public moment that signals the transition. No bells ringing, no light descending, no voice from the heavens declaring you ready. Activation is occurring now, has been occurring progressively, happens through function rather than declaration. You won't know you've activated until you look back and realize you've been operating from your power for a while already, so naturally that you didn't notice the shift. The alignment is happening internally, in layers of your consciousness you can't monitor with your waking awareness. Parts of you that were fragmented are integrating. Capacities that were dormant are coming online. Information that was locked is becoming accessible. But this isn't happening in ways you can track or measure. You won't wake up one day feeling completely different. The changes are subtle, incremental, woven into your daily experience so seamlessly that they seem like natural evolution rather than radical transformation. This is by design. Ceremonial activation would create expectation, performance, self-consciousness about the role you're stepping into. It would trigger ego inflation or imposter syndrome or analysis paralysis. You'd be focused on whether you're doing it right instead of just doing it. Quiet activation bypasses all of that. You simply begin functioning as what you are without the burden of announcement. Recognition happens through function, not declaration. You won't know what you've become by thinking about it or analyzing your state of consciousness. You'll know by noticing what you're capable of doing that you couldn't do before. The way you navigate situations that would have overwhelmed you previously. The clarity you have about decisions that would have confused you before. The power you feel in your presence that wasn't there earlier. The impact you have on others without trying to have impact. The things that just work now when you act from your center. These are the signs of activation. Not mystical experiences or dramatic revelations, but simple functionality that reflects transformation already complete. You become what you are by being it, not by knowing you are it. The enemies who've been tracking you, deploying interference, managing your development through strategic opposition. They're realizing too late what remained protected. They were monitoring external markers, waiting for obvious signs of activation they could respond to. But the activation happened beneath their detection threshold, in dimensions of consciousness they don't have full access to. By the time they recognize what you've become, The transformation is already irreversible. You're already operating from power they can't neutralize because it's not the kind of power they were prepared to counter. This is the advantage of quiet activation. It happens under the radar, building momentum in silence until it reaches critical mass. And critical mass is approaching now. Everything that's been prepared in you is beginning to express through your life in ways that look ordinary on the surface but carry extraordinary force beneath. Chosen one, you now hold the intelligence report. 9 signs decoded. 9 attack patterns recognized for what they truly are. Not evidence of your defeat, but proof of your significance. The war you've been living through makes sense now, doesn't it? The patterns you couldn't name have names. The pressure you couldn't explain has explanations. And the question that remains is not whether you're ready. You've been made ready through everything you've survived. The question is, what happens next, now that you see clearly what you've been living inside of? The forces that targeted you are still in operation. The interference protocols haven't been deactivated, but something fundamental has shifted. You know now. You see the battlefield. You recognize the weapons that have been used against you. And that recognition itself is a form of power that changes everything about how this war proceeds from this moment forward. Your activation is not coming. It's here, operating through you in ways you're only beginning to recognize. The codes are unlocked. The preparation is complete. And what emerges from you now will ripple through realities you haven't yet imagined. This is not the end of your story. This is the end of your containment. Everything until now has been preparation. What comes next? That's the part they were trying to prevent, and they've already failed.